Helldivers 2 is a turning point. It's a moment in time in which players actually came together to make a difference, banded together in the face of adversity, in the face of corporate greed, and actually made a change. It's proof that if we want better products, that we can actually make that happen. And we just did. And while I think this is a major win for the Helldivers 2 community, this is something that's far bigger than that. Because this stamps right in the face of all of the people that believe that, well, change can't happen. There's nothing that we can do in the face of these companies and some of the decisions that they make to ruin our games and take away our rights as consumers. And this time we put our foot down and it sticked. This is a really, really important moment. And I really don't think people understand the weight of this. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Man, I go on vacation for 4 days and this is what happens. I'm going to go on vacation again. In 2023 and 2024, we've seen a major shift in our interests as players, not aligning with what many of the largest publishers and studios in gaming have been producing. Players want more freedom, more access, lower prices, and higher quality. However, that's just not in the playbook for today's AAA game companies. We've seen studios delivering less content at lower quality at a higher price, often ignoring the plight of consumers who want to buy their products and most times are even telling them exactly what they need to get our money. And as a result of this disconnect, we've seen breakout successes from lesser-known studios, middle-market studios, and indie developers that are starting to take a bigger and bigger cut of the pie, more than usual, and they've just been continuing to deliver on the players' needs in a way that the vast majority of the industry hasn't. I mean, Hogwarts Legacy outsold Call of Duty, which was the first time in 15 years since the original Modern Warfare 2 in 2009, where Call of Duty has been the highest-selling game year over year. Baldur's Gate 3, a turn-based RPG, entered into the cultural lexicon, outshining every game in the same year that we saw Diablo 4, Starfield, Super Mario Wonder, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Final Fantasy XVI, Resident Evil 4, Street Fighter 6, and more. In 2024, we've witnessed the meteoric rise of indie titles like Pacific Drive and Balatro. Two gacha game companies, Shift Up and Cygames, both released premium quality titles like Stellar Blade and Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. First ever game releases like Palworld exploded across the market, and a middle market release like Helldivers 2 slammed into the industry, dominated live service, and is making a lot of us question whether or not the rest of the industry is just sleeping. Many of these games are sold at a fair price, and I think that's something that's incredibly important. But moreover, many of these games are showing that players today are sick and tired of the same recycled content that's been sold to players at a higher price with less game and more monetization. I can't be the only one who has noticed that players today are more vocal and informed than ever before. They are more aware of their purchases, predatory corporate tactics, and are growing more price sensitive day after day. Now, I brought this up in a recent video of mine where I talked about how indie games are taking over the entire industry, and in it, mostly I was just talking about how many publishers and studios that are out there are just pricing a lot of players out of games. They're spending way too much money making them, and they're never going to be able to reach their sales totals because they're not making the games accessible or available to many players. Something that we saw with the Sony lockdown with the PSN accounts and how many countries you couldn't even have an account in the first place. And beyond that, these companies aren't really also delivering products that we want or services that we want either. And that's causing a major disconnect with players. And one of the other things, too, that I noticed is that how many of these companies, for some odd reason, completely underestimate the power of the internet and our ability to be able to see through their bullshit. And because of that, players have become much more cautious when it comes to their purchases. They're much more informed before they make them. They're talking about them more often with other people. They're watching streamers or YouTube videos and things like that before they ever even press purchase. And what happens as a result of that is that we've stopped following a lot of these companies. We're not as excited for their products anymore because we're just not interested in the same thing that they keep doing because, well, we literally have proof of them being so repetitive in the first place and delivering a lesser quality product for an even higher price. And what that leads to is us starting to look for the next game, the next studio to follow, the next publisher or whoever it might be, the next franchise that we're going to be really interested in or invested in. And, well, sad thing for them is that we found them quicker than most of the industry probably expected us to in the first place. And Helldivers 2 is one of those examples. It's a game that we've been looking for, that game that just does it right and does it the way that we've always wanted many of these games to do it in the past. And that's what makes the story of Helldivers 2 so important, but moreover, it's what makes the controversy surrounding the game and, well, our response to it so historic. Now, I don't want to spend too much time rolling over all the details. You've heard much of it by now, but I do want to recap some of the things in hopes that viewers outside of Helldivers 2 can find value in this moment because it's just that important. Helldivers 2 on launch faced a ton of issues. The game was hit with unexpected success and its servers were overloaded. Now, instead of this deterring players from wanting to buy the game, it just made them want it even more. Sales continued to double overnight, and Arrowhead Studios started chopping off pieces of the live service just to try to give the game and the server some headroom and keep up with the growing demand. First, it was the liberation rates and the reward delays, and then next it was the optional PlayStation login. After months had passed, the game had stabilized, and the furlough allowed by Sony for the login had ended, and Arrowhead Studios made an announcement for its reinstatement. This led to immediate backlash as players in droves took to Reddit, Discord, Twitter, Steam, and wherever else they could be heard, voicing their dissatisfaction with the change. At the time, I was on vacation, and with zero context, even at first glance, I was confused. I remembered the optional login when the game first launched and ignored it. Tons of games on Steam have something similar. Even Larian Studios has a launcher that pops up advertising their other games and products and asking if you would like to make an account. Ubisoft games, EA games, Epic games, damn near all games that are out there, especially the live service ones, have some type of login. And while I hate it as much as the next player, I didn't really see why it was that big of a deal. It was on the page right when you purchased the game. It was told to players that it would be later reinstated. And then we noticed a change. Sony had flipped the optional PSN login to a required one, even going as far as stealth changing their end-user license agreement, forcing players to do something they already didn't want to do with absolutely no incentive other than to play the game that they had already played for months and had already paid for. Likely even spent money on microtransactions wanting to support a game that was widely known as the best live service in recent history. This isn't just any game. Helldivers 2 is a cultural phenomenon, a beacon of ethical live service and beloved by many. And an action like Sony's was guaranteed to meet heavy backlash as their actions contrast so heavily against what Helldivers 2 means to so many players. And a change like a required PSN login came with another very weighted caveat. It would block access to hundreds of thousands of players who lived in countries that weren't available to have a PlayStation account. What's wild about this is effectively a rug pull that's being pulled off, or attempted to be pulled off, by one of the biggest platforms, one of the biggest publishers in all of gaming, one of the most recognizable names in broad daylight, and they thought they were going to get away with it, which is even more hilarious and absurd, but they just didn't realize just how important this game is to so many people. And I was dumbfounded how Sony would pull off one of the biggest PR disasters with a game that is slated to be Game of the Year. One of their most popular games released in the last few years, one of their most successful releases on PC, and a game that is still blowing it off the Richter scale when it comes to how many people are still playing the game online every single day. And I don't think I've ever seen players this upset or this vocal over a change that any studio or publisher has ever made in the past. And it's rightfully so. They sold the game in countries where they knew that players would not be able to play the game in the future, and they didn't care. They wanted more than what they already have. They let that greed blind them, and then they let the players show them the light. Sad thing for Sony is that they didn't realize just how well this community is trained at taking on a single threat. As the outrage grew, negative reviews poured in by the hundreds of thousands. The game plummeted overnight from overwhelmingly positive to overwhelmingly negative on Steam, and it was the highest trending discussion on Twitter and Reddit basically the entire weekend. Articles, commentators, everyone in the industry was talking about it, and Steam wasn't going to ignore it. Customers living in countries that were affected by Sony's PSN requirement began receiving refunds as their game was delisted in 177 countries. Arrowhead's community managers and moderators tried to put out the fires, but ultimately only made matters worse as they just confirmed suspicions that they knew that this would affect people who had already purchased the game and frequently cracked under the pressure of the negative feedback, talking down to players and brushing their concerns aside, only fanning the flames and adding more fuel to the fire. Surprisingly, one would stand above the rest, owning up to their mistakes as community manager Spitz apologized to players and wound up saying, I want people to make their displeasure known in a place where it might actually make a difference. Steam reviews and refund requests will do that. Angry posting in the Discord won't. I'm not happy about this decision either. And that's exactly what ended up happening. After an entire weekend of protest, refunds, reviews, and discussions, Sony announced that they would rescind their order entirely. As the weekend closed, Sony responded by saying, Helldivers fans, we've heard your feedback on Helldivers 2 account leaking update. The May 6th update, which would have required Steam and PlayStation Network account leaking for new players and for current players beginning on May 30th, will not be moving forward. We're still learning what is best for PC players, and your feedback is invaluable. Thanks again for your continued support of Helldivers 2, and we'll keep you updated on future plans. This is huge. We haven't seen anything like this since Star Wars Battlefront 2, where they required basically every unlockable character to be gotten through loot boxes, where we saw commentators, legislators, customers, everybody get involved, ultimately leading to them removing loot boxes entirely from the game. But this is bigger than that. This is us not going up against EA. This is Sony. This is one of the biggest publishers and platforms in the entire industry. And they're not the type that usually moves on things like this, but our distaste, our outrage was answered appropriately for once, which is wild. But it just goes to show that if you have that many players that actually band together on something, change can happen. But you just have to make sure that you do it the right way and you're effective about doing it in the first place. If players care enough, they can change how these studios act and what kind of products that we get in return, what kind of services we get in return, and even how we're treated in some ways. And I think that's really important. But what not a lot of people are really talking about is why. And the reason why is because these studios are far more reliant on us than they ever have been in the past. And nobody's talking about it. I want players to remember that once upon a time, Sony was the one that was keeping Xbox in line. When they tried releasing the Xbox One, they wanted to require an internet connection with heavy DRM, not allowing players to be able to trade or sell their games. Sony eventually ended up poking fun at Xbox with a commercial.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Thanks.
PlayStation.
However, times have changed, and now, while we've been distracted by some incredibly fantastic releases over the last year or so, both Sony and Xbox have come out with major concerns about the future of the industry and of their platforms, with year-to-date hardware sales dropping by 32%, and many of both platforms' games not meeting their return on investment for the money that they've been spending on those games. They've convinced themselves and their shareholders that it's an industry trend when really it's just players aren't interested in playing their games as much as they used to be. Sony's assured earner in Spider-Man 2 cost over $300 million to make, sold 10 million copies, but needed to sell 7 million copies just to be able to break even. Xbox and Starfield were undoubtedly a worse disaster than even that. While Xbox had Pal World and Sony had Helldivers 2, these weren't the horses that they were betting on. This was filler to get them through the year, and they were outperforming their flagship titles. And when your flagship titles are being outperformed by your filler, you have a problem. And it's a problem that their shareholders are well aware of by now. That's why we've seen record layoffs from both companies. Just another one today. As of recording this video, Xbox got rid of Arcane Austin and a few others. But they're claiming that games need to go above $70. And it makes sense why Sony would want to force players into creating a PlayStation account just to be able to boost their player numbers, especially in a year where they don't really have very many high-profile first-party releases. And Sony this year has really just gotten started with offering their titles on both PC and PlayStation. Sony wants to show an increase in PSN signups because it's going to bolster confidence from their shareholders. Now, this is probably a passing thought by now, but back in January of 2024, a lack of confidence in Sony's gaming margins cost a stock drop from $98 to now $84 a share, with their hardest week wiping $10 billion off of the books. The green line has not been going up, and while they can try to mask these issues with studio acquisitions like Xbox with Activision Blizzard King, ultimately these companies are growing more desperate as we are starting to buy less from them and more from others. And nobody is to blame but themselves. They're the ones that think it's a great idea to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into the exact same IP over and over again, and for some odd reason expect a better result. Like, more players are just going to magically appear out of nowhere. Not every game is made for every person. And by the way, when I'm saying more players, I'm not talking about like, yeah, a couple 100,000. No, they're projecting like millions more than what their last game sold, and that's just preposterous. It's ridiculous. And I don't understand how these folks even have jobs in the first place, because they're just driving the ship right into the iceberg at this point. They're not taking the time to realize, oh, maybe we should actually split up some of these larger teams. Maybe make a couple of smaller games that are a little bit more affordable and more accessible to more players. And then, you know, I don't know, maybe create some new IPs while we're at it. And also, I can't be the only one that thinks that video games are just way too damn expensive anymore. They're pricing themselves out of the reach of customers. Every single game that comes out has 4 separate copies that you can buy. Each one has different perks and things like that that aren't really all that optional anymore. Especially when you're looking at like competitive games that have 3-day early access, or advanced access as now it's called. Games like that Star Wars game where they're literally locking story content behind the different editions of the game. On top of that, you also have companies that are out there like Sega, or, well, just recently Escape from Tarkov, that think it's fine to be able to literally put in game features into different editions of the game and piecemeal it to us. It's too much. It's too much. Obfuscated currencies, microtransactions turning into macro transactions. There's so many games that are out there today that have microtransactions where you can quite literally spend more than you purchased on the game, for the game, in the game, with just one click. That's it. It's ridiculous. I don't understand why these people think it's sustainable. And it's obvious that it's not, because they're the ones that are suffering from it. We see it in their stock prices. We see it in their layoffs. We see it in everything else. And I think that's one of the reasons why Helldivers 2 is such an important game for a lot of people. It was that game that we all started to look for. It's that next studio, that next prized game that we could play as long as we wanted to, and we had a lot of faith in, and it respected our time, it respected our money, and we loved it for that. And this PlayStation account login was just the final straw that broke the camel's back on this one, because this is PlayStation coming to PC players, forcing us to sign up for something that we get no benefit from whatsoever. There's nothing, no tangible benefit that we get from this. The only thing we know is that they just get our data, which they have a really bad track record with being able to keep a hold of in the first place, and that's it. We just continue to get access to something that we already had access to in the first place. I'm just sick of it. And everybody else is too. I can't help but point back to a recent interview with Larian's head of publishing, Michael Dowse, who in an interview with PC Gamer said that players just don't want to be bamboozled. We just want to be spoken to. Dowse said, "Marketing is dead. It truly is. I can back this shit up, man. There are no channels anymore. It doesn't work. You used to have marketing, communication, PR. Marketing was essentially retail theory. You were trying to get your box on the right point of the store shelf, and you had partnerships with retail stores. Those pipelines are gone. Now you've got the internet. Nobody's looking at ads anymore. All the channels that we would usually market through are no longer really viable. So their function is also reduced by the fact that players just want to be spoken to. They don't want to be bamboozled. They just want to know what you're making and why you're making it and who it's for." And I think he's right. Moreover, I think that it only goes to prove just how much these companies have been scrambling because their old tactics don't work the same as they used to anymore. I hate advertisements. I have YouTube Premium. I don't have Hulu, and I completely stopped watching Amazon Prime because I don't want to be inconvenienced or have my experiences ruined by unwanted interruptions. With that said, without standard marketing, these companies have forgotten how to talk to players. They've lost themselves in the numbers and data-driven science rather than just paying attention to what people are saying and what players are actually playing. While I know many community managers out there don't have the best reputation, I personally think that the future of delivering on players' needs is them. They have direct access to the wants and tastes of all the players that are playing their games right now. With that said, it's a rapidly evolving role that frequently spirals outside of the job requirement, and I just don't think there's a lot of people that are up to the task. While Sony walked back the PSN requirement for Helldivers 2, we shouldn't forget that they let Arrowhead Studios fry the entire time until they could swoop in and look like the hero. While I wholeheartedly agree that many of the things that both Arrowhead's moderators and community managers said were wildly out of line and tone deaf, at the same time, I try to put myself in their shoes, the people who didn't make these corporate decisions, yet acting as a target dummy for both valid criticism and unfiltered vitriol and hate. I'm on YouTube. I'm not free from criticism, not in the least bit, actually. And while many people will tell you just ignore what some of these people are saying, when you start reaching hundreds of thousands or even millions of people, it's hard not to let a couple of those comments or things slide in and slide through, or people get a hold of you and contact you or find some way to do so because it's the internet. And yeah, it sucks. And the thing is that when you're looking at some of these community managers, that's what they're being exposed to. It's a rapidly evolving role, and they're becoming far more important than they used to be. They're becoming the face of these companies in many ways. And that's a tough role to be able to take on, especially given the fact that there are a lot of gamers that are out there that believe that a $40 purchase is a ticket for them to say and treat people however they want to, say whatever they want to those people. And it also doesn't help that at the exact same time, you have content creators, commentators, and people like that are engagement farming, stoking the flames, and putting even more pressure on these people. And sometimes it's even just an innocent slip up. And I'm not necessarily saying that's what's going on with Helldivers 2, but there was some of that was in there. And I think that's something really important to keep in mind, that what these community managers need to be is a completely entirely different beast than what they actually are. They may be qualified on paper to do the job, but I don't think they're qualified socially to be able to handle the pressures that come along with a role like this in the first place. And especially looking at the fact that Sony let Arrowhead fry in the limelight of this for so long, that's a lot of pressure, a lot of hate, a lot of vitriol that came towards their way. And of course, these people are going to crack under the pressure because it's probably not initially what they signed up for or even thought they were going to get into in the first place. That doesn't excuse the things that they say, but it just goes to show that we will sometimes ask for an unfathomable amount of patience and thick skin from people while never showing the same kind of courtesy towards them. These companies need to realize that communication is the next form of marketing. This is the current form of marketing in many ways, and they need to hire for that. They need to hire an entirely different breed of people to be able to do this job. Now, at the same time, as a community, sometimes we do a really good job at making people not want to listen to us. I've seen this change boiling in the background for a long time now. And while there's a lot of people that are surprised that we actually overturned an anti-consumer practice by the side of Sony, I'm not. The battle lines have been drawn, and the audiences for gaming have been growing, and social media's influence has grown along with it, and times are changing. By the day, consumers are more than adequately informed by the wealth of information that's on the internet. Battlestate Games goes to try to change the wording for Escape from Tarkov's bundles to try to scam players out of more money. Well, players end up finding the archived website and show the changes, just the same as they did with Sony's PSN account changes on their end-user license agreement. Bit by bit, stories are pieced together. Over the course of hundreds of thousands of different discussions that players are having, connecting the dots, and quickly realizing that many of these companies are blatantly attempting to try to steal from us, actively ruining our games, injecting ideological garbage, and removing our ownership from the games that we play. As the cost of gaming has increased, our expectations have risen alongside it. Players aren't getting their information from their local GameStop sales rep anymore. They're getting it from their friends and social media. When these companies choose to step below our expectations, try to scam us or otherwise, your main form of advertising for these companies has now become a campaign against your game. Reddit posts beget tweets, tweets beget YouTube videos, then shorts, clips, live streams, and the next thing you know, your 45-second skippable ad, your 1-minute commercial, your handful of billboards are waiting in a sea of hundreds of millions of hours of watch time and engagement from players that are cooking your game, your studio, your publisher, and your money. Helldivers 2 is a turning point, a moment in time in which many of these companies need to reflect on. Times have changed, the bell has tolled, and we're the captain now. I think this all started with the $70 price hike, and while that doesn't really necessarily affect the $40 that, Helldivers 2 costs, it does have something to do with the general consensus of player opinions and emotions towards many of these studios and the games and things like that are out there right now. I think that they've priced themselves out of the reach of so many customers that so many people now today are just way more cautious about what they're buying. They want to know more about it. They want to make sure that whatever game they buy is not going to be a game that's going to rip them off. They want to make sure it's a game that's worth the $70 that they spend on it, because they had to earn that money to buy that game in the first place, and that studio needs to earn that money if they want it as well. And that's really all this is coming down to. This is just a situation in which players got backed into a corner, and now the studios or the publishers, Sony, are surprised that they're getting bit as a result. You can push and push and push only so far before finally we're going to push back. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And this is one of those moments that I think is going to be a positive change going on into the future. One we're going to look back on and go, hey, man, that's where it all started. And this is a way for us to just keep pushing forward. This isn't one of those things where we need to like, oh, okay, we got what we wanted. Now everything's okay. No, when the next game tries to do something similar, shut them down. Shut them down immediately. Point back to what happened here and say, do you want that? Because I guarantee they probably don't. I'd imagine that Sony shareholders didn't want the backlash that they saw all over the internet for almost 4 days straight either. So, yeah, this is incredible. I'll be honest with you. When I first started this channel and I started talking about these kind of things, especially just like consumer buyer beware stuff and things like that, trying to get more people more interested in knowing, I don't know, just what's going on in this industry and how to make a smart purchase and things to look out for and stuff like that. I didn't think that I would see a moment like this happen so soon. And damn, am I happy to see it. And I wasn't even a part of it. I was on vacation. So that makes it even better, but also kind of worse. Man, I could have got a lot of views from that. Speaking of, you guys need to go watch my video on how indie gaming is taking over the industry. For some odd reason, the Google algorithm didn't really like that one all that much. So I'm linking that one down in the comments below. You guys need to go watch that one. It was a good one. I put a lot of work into it. Outside of that, I appreciate you guys watching the video. I appreciate you guys fighting the good fight out there. And yeah. Anyway, catch me live on Twitch. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, my friends. And I will see you in Helldivers 2. Peace.
Family, 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 family.